Question time for you. How many suds are in a bar of soap? How many seeds are in a cucumber? How many jelly beans fit into a glass jar? You don't know. That's the point. Until 1965, black people across the Jim Crow South encountered unanswerable questions, including the ones I just mentioned, from registrars at polling places where they tried to vote. Now, the tendency was for white voters to somehow answer those questions right, and for black voters to get them wrong. Then there was the so-called literacy tests. Take question 48 from this 1965 Alabama test, which asks, how many votes must a person receive in order to become president if the election is decided by the U.S. House of Representatives? Remember, there was no Google back in 1965. Or take question 27 from this 1964 Louisiana test. Write right from left to right as you see it spelled here. That seems confusing, and there was little time for befuddlement because the test, which could include upwards of 70 questions, usually had a 10-minute time limit. A single wrong answer meant a failing grade. After mounting pressure from civil rights leaders, Congress passed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which banned literacy tests like these and other forms of overt voter suppression. But in 2013, the Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the act that required federal oversight for states with a history of racial discrimination. Such discrimination, Chief Justice John Roberts argued, was a thing of the past. Voting rights activists and progressive leaders warned that without Justice Department oversight, dozens of states would roll out increasingly restrictive voting laws targeted at minority groups. Former President Barack Obama made just this point in his eulogy to the late civil rights hero John Lewis back in 2020.
We may no longer have to guess the number of jelly beans in a jar in order to cast a ballot. But even as we sit here, there are those in power who are doing their darndest to discourage people from voting.
And while I haven't always agreed with President Obama, there is no denying that some states are trying to make it harder to vote, particularly relative to 2020, when states went through an unusual historic expansion in voting access due to the pandemic. In 2021 alone, 19 states, mostly Republican-led, enacted 34 laws to restrict voting by bolstering voter ID laws, eliminating polling places, rolling back mail-in voting, and even banning the distribution of water bottles to voters waiting in line. But things aren't always so black and white, or really blue and red. For instance, a typically conservative state like Georgia has actually been ahead of deep blue New York in some laws that provide access, such as expansive early voting and no excuse absentee ballots. There are, in short, many reasons why black and minority voters turn out in smaller numbers, and they don't all have to do with restrictive voting laws. But despite record overall turnout in the 2020 election, the racial gap in the U.S. has persisted, with 71% of white voters casting ballots compared to 63% of black voters. Progressive leaders worry that new voting laws will only widen that gap. Republicans would say that they're not trying to make voting harder, they're trying to make it safer by preventing voter fraud. The problem with that argument, and with President Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen, is that there's simply no evidence of widespread election fraud in American elections. The upcoming 2022 midterms will be the first major test of these new voting laws. Congressional Democrats are desperate to pass a new federal voting rights bill before Election Day, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, that would reverse that 2013 Supreme Court decision I just mentioned, but it won't make it out of the Senate. When did protecting voting become so political? And how much will these new voting laws affect black turnout in the 2022 midterms?